My husband abandoned me one day before my due date to go on a luxury vacation with his parents. You will be fine, he told me while zipping his designer suitcase. Just take a taxi to the hospital if anything happens. The tickets are non-refundable. I stayed completely silent, watching him walk out the door. The next morning, he called me panicking, demanding to know why his credit cards were declining at a five-star resort in St. Bart's. I replied coldly, "That is the price you pay," and hung up the phone. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth. The sharp pain radiating through my lower back was so intense it made my breath hitch, but that physical agony was nothing compared to the sound of Marcus zipping up his leather duffel bag. I leaned against the doorframe of our bedroom, my hands cradling my 9-month pregnant belly. "Marcus, you cannot leave right now," I pleaded, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "The doctor said the baby could come any minute." Marcus did not even look up from folding his perfectly pressed linen shirts. "Maya, we have been over this a dozen times," he sighed, using that condescending corporate tone he reserved for moments when he thought I was being unreasonable. "Mama Estelle has been planning this trip for an entire year. It is a major networking event for the family. Do you know how it would look if I did not show up? It is an exclusive gathering to celebrate Black excellence and legacy. I am a senior executive. I cannot just back out because you are feeling some false contractions." He tossed a pair of sunglasses into his bag and finally glanced at me. "You are overreacting. Women have babies every single day. Just relax." My jaw tightened. But my husband was more concerned about preserving his golden boy image for his mother than the safety of his unborn daughter. I watched him check his reflection in the mirror, adjusting the collar of his polo shirt. He looked like the picture-perfect successful family man, an illusion his mother had painstakingly crafted and demanded we all maintain. A loud, obnoxious honk from a luxury vehicle echoed from the driveway, shattering the tense silence in our foyer. Before I could say another word, the front door swung open. Mama Estelle marched into my home without knocking, treating the space like an extension of her own kingdom. She was dressed in a resort wear ensemble that probably cost more than most people make in a month, her jewelry clinking loudly. "Marcus, baby, the car is waiting," she announced, completely ignoring my presence until she almost bumped into me. She paused, looking me up and down with an expression of thinly veiled disgust. "Maya, you are still in your pajamas. Please tell me you are not going to ruin this trip by acting sick." "I am in labor," Estelle, I said firmly, gripping the doorframe tighter as another wave of pain washed over me. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "Oh, please," she scoffed, waving a manicured hand toward the small desk in the corner of the living room where my laptop sat. "That is exactly why I always tell Marcus that you simply do not understand the real world. You sit around all day doing data entry freelance work in your slippers. You have no concept of the pressure a real corporate executive like my son is under. He carries the weight of this family name. He is building an empire. He cannot be tethered to a woman who uses a little stomachache to trap him at home." I bit my tongue, tasting blood. She had spent our entire marriage dismissing my work as a cute typing hobby. She thought I was a struggling assistant, lucky to have bagged a wealthy man. She did not know that the laptop on that small desk was the command center for a health data security firm I had built from the ground up, a company recently valued at over $50 million. She did not know that her son had secretly drained his executive savings trying to play day trader, or that the lifestyle she so proudly flaunted was currently being bankrolled by my company. Marcus grabbed his duffel bag and walked past me, stopping only to press a crumpled $100 bill into my trembling hand. "Take an Uber if you really need to go to the hospital," he said smoothly, already pulling out his phone to check his emails. "The tickets are non-refundable, Maya. I cannot let my mother down. Just call me when the baby is actually here." Estelle smiled triumphantly, looping her arm through his. "Do not worry about her, Marcus," she purred. "She will be fine. Women in our family are strong. She just needs to learn her place. They walked out the front door, the heavy wood slamming shut behind them with a finality that echoed in my chest. I stood alone in the foyer, the $100 bill slipping from my fingers to the floor. Suddenly, a warm rush of fluid cascaded down my legs, soaking my slippers. My water just broke. The pain spiked sharper and more demanding than before. But as I looked at the closed door, I did not cry. I did not panic. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app. Marcus thought he was flying to a luxury paradise on the dime of an executive. He had no idea the black corporate credit card in his wallet belonged to my company. With one steady swipe of my finger, I tapped the button to report the card as stolen. Let them enjoy their flight. The heavy oak door was halfway shut when a loud, obnoxious voice echoed from the driveway, halting Marcus in his tracks. It was Brad. He had stepped out of his pristine white Range Rover, leaving the engine running and the air conditioning blasting. Brad was the kind of man who wore mirrored aviators on an overcast day and treated everyone outside his tax bracket like a nuisance. He strolled up the front walkway, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his tailored resort shorts, exuding an aura of unearned superiority. From the passenger seat of the luxury sport utility vehicle, Chloe, Marcus's younger sister, leaned out the window. She was already holding a crystal champagne flute, her oversized designer sun hat shielding her face from the morning light. Chloe giggled, a sharp and grating sound that pierced through my mounting panic. "Come on, Marcus," she yelled across the manicured lawn, her voice dripping with entitlement. "If we miss our first-class boarding group because your wife is throwing a tantrum, I am going to make her pay for my next spa day out of her own pocket." Brad reached the porch, his mouth twisted into a condescending smirk. He peered past Marcus and Estelle, his eyes locking onto me as I clutched my swollen abdomen. A fresh wave of agonizing pain radiated from my lower back, forcing a sharp gasp from my lips. I braced myself against the wall, fighting for breath. Brad did not offer to help. He did not ask if I needed an ambulance or a glass of water. Instead, he let out a short, arrogant laugh and shook his head as if I were a child staging a tantrum. "Relax, Maya," Brad said, his voice dripping with that unbearable crypto-bro arrogance he used to assert dominance over Marcus at every family dinner. Women have been giving birth in caves for thousands of years. You do not need an entire production team to push out a kid. If you cannot afford the hospital taxi on your little freelancer budget, do not worry. I am feeling generous today. I will transfer you some Ethereum while we are in the air. You just need to figure out how a digital wallet works first, though that might be a bit too complicated for someone who just types spreadsheets all day. Chloe shrieked with laughter from the car, raising her champagne flute in agreement. "Good one, babe," she cheered, completely ignoring the fact that her sister-in-law was standing in a puddle of her own amniotic fluid. The sheer audacity of his words sent a jolt of pure adrenaline straight through my veins, temporarily masking the physical agony of labor. Brad was a man who loved to flaunt his supposed wealth, constantly tossing around cryptocurrency jargon to make everyone else feel small and inadequate. It was his relentless boasting that had driven Marcus to secretly drain our joint accounts in the first place. Marcus was so desperate to match Brad's artificial high roller status that he had thrown our entire financial security into the fire. He had stolen from his own unborn child to buy expensive watches and luxury car leases just to keep up with a man who fundamentally looked down on him. And the cruelest irony of all was that Brad was a complete fraud. I knew it for a fact. My data security firm had already flagged his suspicious shell companies during a routine audit months ago. Marcus did not defend me. He did not punch his arrogant brother-in-law in the jaw or demand respect for the mother of his child. He simply gave a nervous, appeasing chuckle, eager to remain part of their exclusive club. "You are right, Brad," Marcus said, completely submitting to the disrespect. "We need to go before traffic gets bad." Marcus turned back to me one last time. He did not look at my face, actively avoiding my eyes entirely. Instead, he reached into the breast pocket of his crisp linen shirt and pulled out a single crumpled $100 bill. He dropped it carelessly onto the small console table by the door. The green paper fluttered down, landing right next to a stack of unpaid utility bills he had been deliberately hiding from me for weeks. You will be fine, Marcus said smoothly, his voice completely devoid of any genuine emotion or concern. Just take a taxi to the hospital. The tickets to St. Bart's are non-refundable, Maya. I cannot lose out on that kind of money. That is the price you pay for bad timing. Just call me when the baby is actually here and try not to make a scene at the front desk. Estelle linked her arm firmly through her son's, pulling him toward the waiting vehicle with triumphant force. Let us go, Marcus, she commanded, not sparing me a single backward glance. The family legacy waits for no one, especially not a drama queen. They turned their backs on me and walked down the brick steps. The heavy front door slammed shut behind them with a violent echoing thud that shook the window panes. The click of the deadbolt locking into place sounded like a final permanent judgment. I was completely alone in the silent foyer. Outside, the Range Rover's engine roared to life. Heavy tires crunched over the gravel driveway, the sound rapidly fading into the distance as my husband drove away to a tropical paradise, leaving me behind in the smoking ruins of our marriage. I sank to the hardwood floor, my knees colliding painfully with the solid wood. The puddle of amniotic fluid soaked through my sweatpants, a stark physical reminder of the imminent reality I was facing. A massive contraction seized my entire body, squeezing my abdomen with the terrifying force of a vice grip. I squeezed my eyes shut, biting down hard on my lower lip until I tasted the sharp metallic tang of blood. The physical pain was blinding, consuming every nerve ending, but the emotional clarity I felt in that exact moment was absolute and crystal clear. They thought I was helpless. They thought I was a pathetic, financially dependent woman who would simply lay down and weep while they lived out their wealthy fantasies. They thought the money they were spending belonged to them by divine right. I did not call 911 first. I did not call my mother or a best friend for comfort. Breathing heavily through the crest of the contraction, I reached deep into the pocket of my pants and pulled out my smartphone. My fingers were trembling uncontrollably, but my mind was completely focused on the task at hand. I opened my secure banking application, bypassing the standard screens and logging directly into the encrypted corporate portal for Apex Cybernetics, the multi-million-dollar company I had quietly built in the shadows while they mocked my freelance job. I pulled up the corporate accounts dashboard. Right there at the very top of the active list was the black metal executive credit card Marcus had slipped into his leather wallet this morning. The card he believed was tied to his own corporate success. The card he fully intended to use to fund champagne brunches, private yacht charters, and Estelle's lavish shopping sprees in St. Bart's. I stared at the glowing screen, a cold, hard resolve settling over me like armor. They wanted to play ruthless games with my life. They wanted to mock my worth and abandon me in my most vulnerable hour. I navigated to the security settings of the main account. A stark red prompt appeared on the screen asking for final confirmation of my chosen action. With one steady, deliberate tap of my thumb, I selected Report Card Stolen. The banking system instantly froze, the account locking down every single cent of my hard-earned money. The digital confirmation flashed a bright, satisfying green. Let them try to check into their 5-star resort now. I shoved my phone back into my pocket. The satisfying green confirmation screen burned into my memory. The pain in my abdomen flared again, sharp and unforgiving, snapping me back to the immediate physical crisis. I had a baby to deliver, and I was going to do it alone. I grabbed my car keys from the console table, leaving Marcus's crumpled $100 bill exactly where it fell. I dragged myself out the front door, locking it securely behind me, and stumbled toward my practical, unassuming sedan. The same sedan Estelle constantly mocked for lacking a luxury hood ornament. Getting into the driver's seat was an agonizing feat of endurance. Every movement sent shockwaves through my pelvis. I gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, panting heavily through my nose as I backed out of the driveway. The drive to Atlanta General Hospital was a blur of traffic lights and blinding pain. I navigated the busy streets with a singular primal focus. I did not shed a single tear for my absent husband. My mind was entirely consumed by the safety of my daughter and the cold, hard reality of what I had to do next. I pulled into the emergency drop-off zone, slamming the car into park and laying on the horn. Two nurses rushed out with a wheelchair, their faces dropping in alarm when they saw me alone, drenched in sweat and amniotic fluid. They hauled me out of the driver's seat, barking questions about how far apart my contractions were and demanding to know who was parking the car. "There is nobody parking the car," I gasped, gripping the armrests of the wheelchair as another violent wave of pressure seized my body. I drove myself. The older nurse looked appalled as they rushed me through the sliding glass doors into the blinding fluorescent lights of the maternity triage. "Where is your husband, honey? We need to call someone immediately to be with you. Who is your emergency contact?" "Call my attorney," I stated, my voice remarkably steady despite the excruciating pain. "His name is David Sterling. The number is in my phone." The nurses exchanged baffled glances. A young admissions clerk jogged alongside the wheelchair, with a clipboard, frantically trying to take down my information between my sharp intakes of breath. "Ma'am, I need the father's information for the preliminary birth certificate filing. What is your husband's legal name and date of birth?" "Leave it blank," I commanded. The clerk blinked, her pen hovering over the paper. "Excuse me, you want the father's section left blank?" I locked eyes with her, my gaze completely devoid of warmth. "You heard me. Put an NA in that box. The man who contributed the genetics is currently flying to the Caribbean on my dime. He lost the right to have his name on this document the second he walked out my front door. Now get me an epidural and a delivery room before I give birth in this hallway." My tone left absolutely no room for debate. They wheeled me straight into the labor and delivery ward, the chaotic energy of medical intervention swirling around me. Wires were attached to my chest. Monitors began beeping rhythmically, and the sharp scent of antiseptic filled my lungs. The physical agony of labor was entirely overwhelming, yet my mind was sharper than it had ever been. Stripped of the daily obligation to play the supportive, quiet wife, I finally saw the past 2 years with terrifying clarity. "Push, Maya. Give me a big, deep push," the attending physician ordered, bracing herself at the foot of the bed. I bared my teeth and pushed with everything I had. The intense physical exertion triggered a sudden, vivid flashback. I saw Marcus standing in our kitchen late at night 6 months ago. He was bathed in the blue light of his laptop screen, frantically transferring $10,000 from our joint savings account to an unknown LLC. When I caught him, he fed me a smooth, rehearsed lie. "Brad has a sure thing, Maya," he had said, not even looking me in the eye. "It is a high-yield crypto staking pool. We have to spend money to make money. I am building generational wealth for our child. You just stick to your typing, I have the finances handled." "Breathe, Maya. You are doing great. Now push again." I pushed, a guttural sound ripping from my throat. Another memory slammed into my consciousness. Estelle at the country club brunch 3 months ago. She was holding court with her elite church friends, flaunting a new authentic Hermes Birkin bag. When the astronomical bill for the champagne brunch arrived, she did not even reach for her purse. She simply waved a manicured hand at the waiter and said, "Put it on my son's tab. He is a senior executive. He insists on spoiling his mother." The very next morning, I woke up to massive overdraft alerts on that account. I scrambled to cover her vanity, quietly siphoning funds from my own company's payroll account just to keep the lights on in our house, all while Marcus claimed his annual bonus was delayed due to market fluctuations. "One more big push, Maya. The head is right here." I gripped the bed rails, my muscles burning, my lungs burning, and pushed with a fierce, terrifying rage. I remembered Brad's condescending smirk. I remembered Chloe's entitled giggles. I remembered the endless parade of expensive dinners, luxury car leases, and designer clothes they all paraded around in, completely oblivious to the fact that my supposed little data entry job was the only thing keeping them out of federal bankruptcy court. Marcus had married me because I was quiet, unassuming, and easy to manipulate. He thought I was a steady, invisible paycheck he could bleed dry to maintain his fraudulent golden boy status. He never bothered to actually look at the tax documents I asked him to sign. He never bothered to ask what my company actually did. A sharp, piercing cry echoed off the sterile walls of the delivery room, pulling me violently out of the past. The physical relief was instant and overwhelming. The doctor lifted a tiny, squirming, beautiful baby girl into the air. "Congratulations!" The doctor beamed, quickly cleaning the baby before gently placing her directly onto my bare chest. "You have a perfect, healthy daughter." I wrapped my arms around her warm, fragile body. Tears finally spilled over my eyelashes, but they were tears of absolute triumph. She felt incredibly solid, incredibly real. As I looked down at her tiny, perfect face, a fierce primal wave of maternal protection anchored itself deep in my soul. No one was ever going to use her. No one was ever going to make her feel small to serve their own ego. The toxic cycle of the Washington family ended today. The delivery room slowly calmed down. The nurses efficiently cleaned the space, speaking in hushed, soothing tones. One of the nurses approached my bedside, holding the small plastic bag containing the personal belongings I had arrived with. She gently placed my smartphone on the rolling tray table next to my bed. The screen immediately lit up, buzzing violently against the plastic surface. The bright display cut through the dim lighting of the recovery room. I did not have to guess who it was. The screen showed 47 missed calls, 14 frantic voicemails, and a barrage of desperate text messages. The location tag on the incoming call display read, "St. Bart's." I let the phone ring for 5 more seconds, savoring the absolute silence of my hospital room, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the beautiful baby girl resting against my chest. I stroked her tiny head with one hand and slowly reached for the phone with the other. I swiped the green icon to accept the call and brought the speaker to my ear. I did not say hello. I simply waited. "Maya, what the hell is going on?" Marcus screamed into the receiver. His voice was entirely stripped of that smooth, polished corporate veneer he usually wore. He sounded exactly like a cornered animal. "Answer me right now. Did you mess with my accounts? Did you forget to pay the balance before I left?" He did not ask if I made it to the hospital. He did not ask if our child had been born safely. His only concern was the plastic card in his hand. I could hear the sheer, unadulterated chaos unfolding in the background of the call. The serene ambiance of a luxury Caribbean resort lobby was being systematically dismantled by my mother-in-law. Estelle was shrieking at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing off what I imagined were marble floors and vaulted ceilings. "Do you know who we are?" Estelle yelled in the background. "We are the Washington family. My son is a senior executive. Run the card again. You peasant, run it again, or I will buy this entire hotel and fire you on the spot." Another voice, calm-clipped and heavily accented, cut through Estelle's hysterical demands. "Madame, I have run the card 4 times. The account is completely locked for suspected fraud. If you cannot provide a valid form of payment for this reservation immediately, I will be forced to contact the local authorities. You are causing a massive disturbance." Marcus was panting heavily into the phone. "Maya," he hissed, lowering his voice in a desperate attempt to hide his panic from the rest of his family. "The front desk is holding our passports. Brad and Chloe are standing right here watching this happen. Brad is laughing at me, Maya. Do you understand how humiliating this is? Call the bank right this second. Tell them there has been a mistake. You need to authorize the transaction and unfreeze my executive savings account immediately. Tell them I am traveling. Fix this before the police get here." I adjusted the soft hospital blanket around my sleeping daughter. I felt her tiny heartbeat against my skin, steady and strong. The contrast between the profound peace in my arms and the pathetic desperation on the other end of the line was staggering. I had spent 2 years of my life shrinking myself to fit into his world. I had hidden my success, downplayed my intelligence, and swallowed my pride to appease a man who viewed me as an accessory and his mother who viewed me as trash. That woman was gone. She died the moment that heavy oak door slammed shut on me in our foyer. "There is no mistake, Marcus," I said. My voice was colder than ice, perfectly measured and absolutely devoid of a single ounce of sympathy. "And there is no executive savings account for me to unfreeze." "What are you talking about?" he stammered, the panic in his voice spiking into pure terror. Stop playing games, Maya. The concierge is literally dialing the local police. Unfreeze the account. I have over $200,000 in that high-yield savings fund. I let out a short, hollow laugh that made him completely freeze on the other end of the line. Your executive savings, I asked, savoring every single syllable. You blew that 3 months ago trying to match Brad's crypto investments. The silence from his end was deafening. I could practically hear his heart drop into his stomach. I continued methodically laying out the absolute destruction of his financial facade. You really thought I did not know Marcus. You thought the pregnant little data entry freelancer would never check the routing numbers. I saw the transfers. You dumped your entire life savings, your annual bonuses, and every spare dime we had into a fraudulent shell company because you were so desperate to impress a brother-in-law who openly mocks you. You lost all of it, every single penny. No! Marcus gasped, his breathing turning ragged. No, that is impossible. The broker said it was locked in a staking pool. He said I was generating passive income. The broker was a scammer, I stated bluntly. A scammer my company flagged during a routine security sweep weeks ago. You are completely broke, Marcus. You have been broke for months. But the black card, he pleaded, his voice cracking with a pathetic whimper. The black card has a limitless balance. I have been using it for weeks. You just need to call them and unlock it. I looked down at my beautiful daughter, tracing the soft curve of her cheek. That black card does not belong to you. I explained, my tone perfectly even. That card is tied directly to Apex Cybernetics. It is a corporate expense account. My corporate expense account. What he whispered, the word barely escaped his lips. Apex Cybernetics, Marcus. The health data security firm I built from the ground up while you and your mother laughed at my little typing hobby. The company that just secured a $50 million valuation. I am the founder. I am the chief executive officer. You have been living off my money for half a year. That designer suit you are wearing, the luxury car in our driveway, the country club dues your mother flaunts, I paid for all of it. And since you are currently attempting to charge a $30,000 luxury vacation to my business account without my authorization, I reported the card stolen. Maya, please, he begged. The sound of his complete devastation was absolute. The background noise on the call shifted. I could hear Brad's booming, arrogant laughter cutting through the lobby. I could hear the distinct sound of local police sirens approaching the resort. Estelle was crying now, begging Brad to cover the bill, while Chloe loudly refused, calling her own mother-in-law a scam artist. You left me in a puddle of amniotic fluid to go drink champagne with people who hate you, I said, delivering the final crushing blow. You told me the tickets were non-refundable. You told me that was the price I had to pay. Well, Marcus, the local authorities have arrived. I highly suggest you figure out how to pay your own price. I did not wait for his response. I moved the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button ending the call. I immediately blocked his number, blocked Estelle, blocked Chloe, and blocked Brad. I turned off the phone completely and placed it face down on the rolling tray table. The room returned to perfect, undisturbed silence. I leaned back against the hospital pillows, wrapping both arms securely around my newborn daughter, and closed my eyes, finally breathing free. The profound silence of my recovery room lasted exactly 2 minutes before the heavy plastic hospital landline beside my bed began to blare. I stared at the blinking red light, immediately realizing what had happened. Since I had permanently blocked their numbers on my personal cell phone, Marcus had panicked and dialed the hospital switchboard, demanding to be connected to my room. I adjusted my sleeping daughter against my chest, making sure she was comfortable, and slowly picked up the receiver. Marcus did not even say hello. He was hyperventilating, his words stumbling over each other in a pathetic, frantic rush. Maya, please, you have to undo this. He begged, his voice cracking under the immense weight of his own public humiliation. The front desk manager is threatening to call the island authorities. You cannot just leave us here with nothing. Before I could utter a single word, a loud scuffle echoed through the receiver. I heard Marcus grunt in protest, followed by the sound of the phone being snatched aggressively from his grasp. Give me the phone, Marcus. You are completely bungling this. The voice was deep, dripping with that familiar grating arrogance. It was Brad. He had swooped in to rescue his brother-in-law, fully believing he could simply bully me into submission from 3,000 miles away. Listen to me very carefully, Maya. Brad commanded, using the exact same tone he used when explaining cryptocurrency to people who did not ask. I do not know what kind of hormonal postpartum meltdown you are currently experiencing, but this little stunt ends right now. You are going to call your bank, authorize the transactions, and wire the necessary funds to this resort immediately. If you refuse, I will personally have my legal team file financial abuse and spousal withholding charges against you before the sun sets. You are stranding your husband in a foreign country, and that carries severe legal consequences. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound echoed brightly off the sterile hospital walls, completely unbothered by his hollow threats. Financial abuse. Brad, I asked, my voice deadly calm and perfectly steady. That is a fascinating choice of words coming from a man currently running an unregistered Ponzi scheme. The line went completely dead for a fraction of a second. What the hell are you talking about? Brad stammered his confident bravado, slipping just enough for me to hear the sudden spike of fear in his chest. I shifted my weight, leaning back comfortably against the pillows. I am talking about your shady shell company, Brad, Global Zenith Holdings. Does that ring a bell? Because it certainly rang several alarm bells for my auditing team. I decided to detail the exact reality of his fraudulent empire, savoring every single syllable. Let us look at the numbers, shall we? Over the last 24 months, Marcus has secretly funneled exactly $214,500 from our joint accounts directly into your fraudulent LLC. You promised him astronomical returns on Ethereum staking pools, but you never invested a single dime of his money. That is a lie, Brad shouted, though his voice was entirely stripped of its former power. You do not know anything about high-level finance. You type spreadsheets for a living. I type spreadsheets, I repeated coldly. Brad, I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Cybernetics. We are a multi-million-dollar health data security firm. My entire career is built on tracking digital footprints, identifying financial fraud, and securing encrypted data networks. I built a fortress of digital security while operating under a strict non-disclosure agreement, and your amateur hour financial crimes popped up on our internal monitors like a brightly lit billboard. You used Marcus's money to pay off the lease on that pristine white Range Rover. You used my husband's stolen savings to fund your extravagant lifestyle, and you did it using a cheap website template that took my security team exactly 4 minutes to dismantle. In the background of the call, the atmosphere in the luxury lobby descended into absolute pandemonium. Chloe, who had apparently been listening on speakerphone, let out a piercing shriek. Brad, what is she talking about? Chloe demanded, her voice bordering on hysterical. Did you steal Marcus's money? Where is the crypto fund? Estelle was sobbing loudly now, completely abandoning her high society persona. Someone fix this, Estelle wailed in the background. The manager is holding my luggage. I am an executive's mother. You cannot do this to me. Brad was breathing heavily into the phone, the sound of a man watching his entire fake life burn to the ground. Maya, listen to me, he pleaded, dropping the legal threats entirely and resorting to desperate bargaining. We are family. Do not do this right now. Just wire the funds to clear the hotel bill so we can leave this lobby, and we will sort out all the financial details when we get back to the States. I promise I will make it right. I looked down at the beautiful, innocent baby girl resting on my chest. I thought about the sheer cruelty of these people, how they had mocked my work, belittled my worth, and abandoned me in the middle of a medical emergency just to sip champagne on a beach. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I was finally returning the favor. There will be no wire transfer, Brad, I stated with absolute finality. You and your esteemed family managed to rack up a $40,000 bill in less than 24 hours. Helicopter transfers from the airport, vintage champagne on arrival, and the premium presidential suite. You really thought you were living the dream on my dime. Maya, please, Marcus screamed from somewhere in the background. They are locking the doors. The resort manager sent an urgent authorization request directly to my corporate office an hour ago. I continued smoothly ignoring my husband's pathetic cries. I officially declined the charges as entirely fraudulent. Furthermore, I informed the manager that the individuals attempting to use the card are not authorized personnel of Apex Cybernetics. What does that mean? Brad gasped. It means the resort manager is currently holding all of your passports in the hotel's safe until that $40,000 balance is settled in full, I explained, delivering the final crushing blow. You cannot check into your suite. You cannot leave the island. And you certainly cannot use my money to bail yourselves out. You wanted to live like billionaires, Brad. Now you can figure out how to pay like one. I pulled the heavy plastic receiver away from my ear and placed it firmly back onto the cradle. The loud click severed the connection, instantly cutting off the sounds of their frantic screams, their public humiliation, and their utter ruin. I leaned back, kissed the top of my daughter's warm head, and smiled. They were stranded in paradise, completely broke and facing the local authorities, while I was exactly where I was always meant to be. The hospital discharged me 48 hours later. Walking through the front door of my own home had never felt so entirely liberating. The stifling, oppressive energy that Marcus constantly dragged into these rooms was gone, replaced by the soft, rhythmic breathing of my daughter sleeping soundly in my arms. I spent the first 24 hours completely disconnected from the outside world. I did not check my email. I did not monitor the corporate servers. I simply sat in the nursery I had painted myself, rocking my baby, soaking in the profound, undisturbed peace of a house that finally belonged solely to us. By the second morning, the maternal bliss seamlessly merged with my sharp analytical instincts. The Washington family was currently scrambling to survive the Caribbean disaster I had engineered, which meant I had a very narrow window to completely fortify my life before they found their way back to American soil. I settled into the leather chair in my home office, balancing my sleeping daughter against my chest with one arm, and opened my laptop with the other. My attorney David Sterling appeared on the screen via Zoom. He looked exactly like the kind of high-powered corporate litigator who dismantled fraudulent men for sport. His desk was covered in the meticulously organized files I had securely encrypted and transferred to his server the previous night. "Are you absolutely certain about executing the full asset forfeiture clause?" David asked, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he stared at the screen. "Once we file these, the financial severing is permanent. You are leaving him with absolutely nothing." "I am more than certain, David," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "Pull up the master expense spreadsheet. Look at line 42. That is the initial $50,000 seed money Brad used to start his supposedly brilliant real estate venture 2 years ago. Marcus literally begged me to secure that loan through Apex Cybernetics. He turned around and told his entire family he secured a private angel investor through his own elite networking skills. He spent that entire Thanksgiving dinner taking all the credit for Brad's success while I quietly served the turkey and washed their dishes. David typed rapidly, his eyes scanning the data. And line 89, he prompted, his tone strictly professional but tinged with clear disgust. "Estelle's platinum membership at the Oak Ridge Country Club," I stated, clicking the digital signature box on my screen to permanently revoke my financial guarantee on the account. $30,000 a year. She spent every single Sunday sipping expensive mimosas on the clubhouse terrace, bragging loudly to her wealthy church friends about how her son's massive tech bonuses kept her wrapped in luxury. Marcus's actual corporate salary barely covered his own tailored suits and golf clubs. I quietly funded that membership through a dummy corporate account just so she would stop making snide, passive-aggressive comments about my modest wardrobe. I let her play the wealthy matriarch because confronting her deep-seated insecurities was more exhausting than simply paying the bill. I signed the next digital document. It was the immediate lease termination for Marcus's pristine white Range Rover. I vividly remembered the day he brought it home, tossing the heavy key fob onto the kitchen counter like a conquering hero. He proudly told Chloe and Brad that he had aggressively out-negotiated the dealership manager. In reality, I had quietly paid the entire 2-year lease up front as a corporate write-off for Apex. Because of the strict non-disclosure agreements attached to my early-stage venture capital funding, I could not publicly claim my own success. I was legally bound to remain the quiet, invisible data entry freelancer. Marcus knew this, and he gleefully exploited my mandated silence to build a fraudulent empire of his own superiority. We are filing the divorce papers under grounds of financial infidelity and egregious marital fraud, David said, organizing the freshly signed digital stack. I have also expedited the corporate protection orders. Your company assets are entirely walled off. Even if Marcus tries to claim marital equity, the paper trail proves he systematically embezzled joint funds to fuel his brother-in-law's unregistered crypto scheme. Any judge in the state will laugh his lawyer out of the courtroom. Execute the filings immediately, I commanded, and David ensure the secondary credit line attached to Chloe's name is permanently canceled. She loves to boast on Instagram about being a self-made boutique entrepreneur. Let us see how many designer handbags she can import when the phantom funding dries up. David nodded, a tight, predatory smile crossing his face. Consider it done. The locks on your residence, he inquired. Replaced yesterday afternoon, I confirmed. I had a private security firm upgrade the entire smart home system. I deactivated the garage keypad, wiped Marcus's biometric access, and had industrial-grade deadbolts installed on every exterior door. For the next 24 hours, I existed in a state of absolute perfect calm. The financial traps were set, the legal documents were filed. The toxic illusion that had suffocated me for 2 years was systematically dismantled and swept away. I spent the afternoon feeding my daughter, singing softly to her as the late afternoon sun filtered through the living room windows. I felt completely transformed. I was no longer the shrinking, accommodating wife trying to keep the peace. I was a multi-million-dollar CEO who had just surgically excised a cancer from her life. The profound golden silence of my sanctuary was shattered instantly. A violent ear-splitting screech of tires tearing across the concrete driveway echoed through the front of the house. A heavy vehicle slammed into park with a jarring thud. Car doors were violently thrown open and slammed shut. The aggressive stomping rhythm of multiple heavy footsteps charged up the front porch stairs. They had made it back. The heavy brass handle of the front door began to rattle violently, accompanied by the furious, desperate pounding of fists against the reinforced wood. The relentless pounding shook the reinforced glass of the front door. Marcus was throwing his entire body weight against the wood, screaming my name through the thick panes. I stood at the top of the staircase, looking down at the entryway with complete and utter detachment. My newborn daughter stirred slightly against my chest, completely oblivious to the pathetic, chaotic spectacle unfolding outside our sanctuary. I took a deep, steadying breath, walked slowly down the stairs, and flipped the heavy latch of the newly installed deadbolt. The heavy oak door flew open. Marcus stumbled across the threshold, nearly tripping over his own feet as his momentum carried him forward. He looked absolutely wretched, a far cry from the polished, arrogant executive who had abandoned me 4 days ago. His face was a peeling raw shade of crimson from the Caribbean sun. His custom-tailored linen shirt, the one he had spent an hour agonizing over before walking out the door, was stained with sweat dirt and desperate wrinkles. He was clutching a cheap plastic duty-free bag instead of his usual monogrammed leather carry-on. Behind him, the rest of the Washington family spilled into the foyer like refugees from a failed luxury cruise. Chloe was missing her expensive cashmere wrap. Her face was shiny with grease, her makeup smeared and her designer sandals scuffed and dirty. Brad looked utterly defeated, his broad shoulders slumped, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He actively avoided making eye contact with me. He knew exactly what financial crimes I held over his head. Then Estelle crossed the threshold. My mother-in-law looked like a deposed monarch dragged through the mud. Her usually immaculate silk pantsuit was hopelessly crumpled. The heavy gold jewelry she wore like armor was conspicuously absent, undoubtedly surrendered to the resort manager to cover a fraction of their mounting tab. She glared at me, her eyes burning with a venomous, unhinged fury. "What is wrong with you?" Marcus screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. He did not ask about my health. He did not even glance at his newborn daughter resting in my arms. You completely destroyed my life. The hotel manager confiscated my vintage Rolex Maya. They took my custom golf clubs as collateral. They threatened to have me arrested for international credit card fraud. Estelle shoved past her son, planting herself directly in front of me. Do you have any idea what you have done to this family? She shrieked, her voice hoarse and cracking from exhaustion. You humiliated the Washington name on a global stage. We were escorted out of the lobby by local police. Complete strangers were recording us on their phones. I had to call Deacon Thomas. I had to swallow my pride, call a man who sits on my own charity board, and literally beg him to wire us money for basic economy tickets home. We sat in the very last row next to the lavatories for 8 hours. She stepped closer, her face contorted in absolute rage. We represent Black excellence in this city. We are leaders. We are the elite. And you, a little nothing from a mediocre background who we took pity on, you dare to freeze my son's hard-earned money. You stranded us like common street criminals. I watched her rant, my expression completely flat. I remembered all the times Estelle had hosted lavish catered dinners in this very house, using the massive entertaining budget I had quietly paid for, while she introduced me to her friends as Marcus's little helper. I remembered her swiping her country club card to buy expensive champagne for her socialite circle, a card directly funded by my supposedly mediocre background. She had built her entire kingdom of elite status on the back of my silent labor, perfectly content to let Marcus take the credit to soothe his incredibly fragile ego. My luggage is locked in a Caribbean vault because of your little stunt, Chloe whined from the doorway, crossing her arms and stomping her foot. Do you know how much those bags cost? I have sponsored posts to fulfill. You have ruined my personal brand. You need to transfer the funds to the resort right now, Brad demanded, trying and failing to muster his usual arrogant, commanding tone. His eyes kept darting to my laptop sitting open on the console table, knowing I had the digital trail of his unregistered LLC ready to deploy. You need to unlock Marcus's accounts before this gets any worse. You are destroying his career. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked directly into Marcus's bloodshot eyes. I gave birth entirely alone, I said, the words falling like heavy stones in the silent foyer. While you were negotiating with the local authorities over your golf clubs, I was in a sterile delivery room pushing our daughter into the world. Estelle let out a sharp, dismissive scoff. Her eyes finally dropped to the warm bundle resting against my chest. Her lip curled in absolute disgust, completely devoid of any grandmotherly warmth or basic human decency. Look at you, Estelle sneered, her voice dripping with pure malice. You are completely delusional. This is not about the baby. This is about your deep-seated jealousy and your pathetic need for attention. You are having a postpartum psychotic break. You are a danger to yourself and a danger to my grandchild. She turned to Marcus, her eyes flashing with a predatory, calculating light. Marcus, take out your phone and call Child Protective Services right now. Tell them your unstable wife has hijacked your finances and is currently suffering a severe psychiatric episode. Tell them she is holding you hostage in your own home. We will take full custody of that child by morning, and you, Maya, will be locked in a psychiatric ward where you belong. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over the screen. He looked at me, waiting for me to break. Waiting for me to apologize, to cry, to beg for forgiveness, just to keep my baby. He fully expected the quiet, accommodating wife to return terrified of his mother's wrath and his empty legal threats. I looked at the four of them, the sunburned, exhausted, pathetic shells of the people who had tormented me for 2 years. I turned away from them in complete silence. I walked over to the antique bassinet resting near the living room archway. I gently lowered my beautiful sleeping daughter onto the soft mattress, securing her safely away from the toxic energy bleeding into my home. I slowly turned back to face the foyer. I walked directly to the heavy oak front door. I grabbed the industrial brass latch of the newly installed deadbolt, pushed the heavy door shut, and slammed the lock firmly into place. The loud metallic click echoed like a gunshot in the tense, silent room. I turned around, leaning my back against the locked door, and smiled. Nobody is leaving until we clear the ledger. The heavy metallic click of the deadbolt seemed to absorb all the remaining oxygen in the foyer. For a fraction of a second, the four of them just stared at me in stunned silence. They were entirely unaccustomed to me holding my ground. I had spent 2 years acting as the invisible shock absorber for their endless drama. They expected me to cower. They expected me to immediately unlock the door and beg for their forgiveness. Instead, I simply stared back my face in unreadable mask. Brad was the first to break the paralysis. He let out a loud, aggressively patronizing sigh and pushed his way past his wife and mother-in-law. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the dominant alpha male energy that usually allowed him to bulldoze his way through any corporate boardroom. "Let us drop the theatrics, Maya!" Brad barked, his voice booming in the confined space. He marched right past me and headed straight for the kitchen, gesturing for me to follow him as if he owned the house. "We are going to sit down at the island and handle this like rational adults before you do permanent damage to your own life." I did not rush. I walked at a slow, measured pace, letting them trail behind me like the messy, chaotic dependents they truly were. The kitchen was immaculate. I had spent the morning cleaning the white marble countertops until they gleamed. The sterile, pristine environment stood in stark contrast to their sunburned, disheveled appearances. Brad planted himself on the opposite side of the kitchen island. He placed both hands flat on the marble, leaning forward to tower over me. Marcus scurried up right behind him, standing in his brother-in-law's shadow and nodding nervously. Estelle remained near the archway, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, radiating pure venom. Brad cleared his throat, adopting a tone of forced, weaponized patience. "I know you just had a baby," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "We all know that pregnancy takes a massive toll on a woman's body and mind. You are highly emotional right now. Your hormones are completely out of balance. You are suffering from some kind of severe postpartum delusion, and it has caused you to act out in a very dangerous, very illegal way." I stood silently on the opposite side of the marble island. I did not blink. I did not defend myself. I just let him dig his own grave. "You do not understand high finance." Maya. Brad continued, taking my silence as a sign of submission. "You have spent your career typing data into spreadsheets. You do not comprehend the complexities of offshore staking pools, liquidity farming, or executive asset management. When you saw those transfers leaving Marcus's account, you panicked. You jumped to hysterical conclusions because you lack the financial literacy to understand what generational wealth building actually looks like." "That is exactly right," Marcus chimed in, his voice cracking slightly. "I was investing for our future, Maya. You had no right to freeze my cards or tamper with my professional accounts. You completely humiliated me in front of industry peers." Brad held up a hand, silencing Marcus instantly. He reached into the inner pocket of his wrinkled, sweat-stained blazer. He pulled out a folded, slightly damp legal document. He smoothed it out flat on the kitchen island and spun it around so it faced me. "This little meltdown ends right now," Brad commanded. His voice dropped an octave, shifting from patronizing to directly threatening. "You have committed multiple federal offenses today. You falsely reported a corporate card stolen. You illegally restricted Marcus's access to marital funds. You engaged in financial abuse. My elite legal team is currently drafting a massive lawsuit that will absolutely bury you. We are talking about federal wire fraud charges, corporate espionage, and a direct petition to Child Services declaring you mentally unfit to care for that baby." Estelle let out a sharp hum of agreement from the doorway. "She belongs in a psychiatric ward," Estelle muttered loudly. "She is completely unhinged." Brad tapped his thick finger against the damp paper on the marble. "I am offering you one chance to walk away from this without going to federal prison. This is a comprehensive power of attorney document. It grants Marcus immediate total control over all shared assets, including full administrative access to your little Apex Cybernetics shell company. You are going to sign this right now. You are going to sign over control so Marcus can restore the family assets, unfreeze my investment capital, and fix the massive legal mess you just created. If you sign it, I will call off my lawyers. We will chalk this all up to a hormonal episode, and maybe we will let you stay in the house." The sheer magnitude of his arrogance was almost beautiful to witness. He honestly believed he held all the cards. He honestly believed a fake legal document and a few misogynistic insults could break me. I looked down at the wrinkled paper. It was a standard boilerplate power of attorney form, likely printed from a free legal website an hour before they boarded their economy flight. I slowly opened the top drawer of the kitchen island. I did not break eye contact with Brad as my hand bypassed the kitchen shears and found exactly what I was looking for. I pulled out a thick red Sharpie. I uncapped the marker with a sharp snap. I leaned over the marble island, pressed the red felt tip directly onto Brad's pathetic pre-drafted contract, and drew a massive thick X from corner to corner. The red ink bled through the cheap paper, completely obliterating the signature line. Brad's mouth dropped open. The smug, confident mask evaporated instantly, replaced by genuine shock. Marcus took a sudden, terrified step backward, bumping hard into the refrigerator. I tossed the red Sharpie onto the counter. It clattered against the marble, the sound slicing through the heavy silence. I reached beneath the island counter and retrieved the thick, professionally bound black dossier my attorney had couriered over that morning. I slammed the heavy file down directly on top of Brad's ruined contract. The gold-embossed seal of my corporate legal firm gleamed under the kitchen pendant lights. "Let us talk about your elite legal team, Brad." I flipped the heavy cover of the dossier open. The crisp white pages inside were covered in highlighted bank statements, offshore routing numbers, and deeply encrypted blockchain ledgers that my team had spent the last 48 hours decrypting. Brad stared at the stack of papers, his confident posture beginning to physically deflate as he recognized the logo of the Cayman Islands banking institution printed at the top of page 1. "You do not have an elite legal team, Brad," I stated, my voice echoing sharply off the marble counters. "You have a single disbarred attorney working out of a strip mall in Boca Raton who set up your shell companies. He is currently under active investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission, and as of this morning, he has completely stopped returning your panicked phone calls. Your elite legal defense fund currently holds exactly $42.16. Brad opened his mouth to object, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land, his face turning a blotchy mottled purple under his severe sunburn. Chloe stepped forward, her heels clicking nervously against the hardwood floor. She gripped Brad's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his wrinkled sleeve. "Brad, what is she talking about?" Chloe demanded, looking back and forth between her husband and the dossier. "Tell her she is lying. Tell her about the massive returns we just posted last quarter. Tell her about the new yacht club membership we are buying next month." I turned the page of the dossier, smoothing it out so Chloe could clearly see the bright red downward trending graphs. "There are no returns, Chloe," I explained with surgical precision. "Your husband is not a cryptocurrency visionary. He is running a textbook amateur-hour Ponzi scheme. Global Zenith Holdings has not minted a single digital token or staked a single coin in over 14 months. He has been taking money from new investors, primarily your gullible brother Marcus, and using it to pay off the initial investors before they catch on and call the federal authorities. He also used Marcus's stolen money to fund your sudden Caribbean vacation, your leased luxury cars, and your entire fake social media lifestyle." Marcus stepped out from behind Brad, his face shifting from an angry red to a sickly pale white. "Maya, you are making this up." Marcus stammered, his voice lacking any of its usual condescending authority. He sounded like a frightened child. Brad showed me the mining farms. He showed me the server facilities on a live video call. They were generating thousands of dollars a day. I saw the operational dashboards with my own eyes. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Marcus, my data security firm, protects the digital infrastructure of multi-million-dollar healthcare networks. Do you honestly think I cannot track a basic IP address? My forensic accounting team ran a deep trace on the video feed Brad showed you. Those server farms do not exist. He showed you a pre-recorded looping video of an abandoned warehouse in Eastern Europe that went offline 3 years ago. The operational dashboards were a cheap graphics template he bought online for $50. Every single dime you funneled from our joint accounts went directly into Brad's personal offshore account. He drained you completely dry. The kitchen fell dead silent save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Chloe released Brad's arm and took a slow, horrified step away from him. Brad refused to look at his wife, keeping his eyes glued to the marble countertop. Estelle pushed her way to the front of the kitchen island. She slapped her hands down on the marble, glaring at me with undiminished hatred. She refused to accept that her perfect son had been played for a fool. Even if Brad made a bad investment? Estelle sneered, lifting her chin in a desperate display of maternal superiority. Even if Brad misled him, Marcus is a brilliant provider. He is a senior executive. He will easily recoup those minor losses with his next quarterly bonus. You are just trying to tear this family apart because you are bitter, hormonal, and obsessed with dragging us down to your mediocre level. I looked at my mother-in-law feeling a strange, cold sense of pity mixed with absolute, undeniable triumph. I turned to the final tab in the dossier and extracted a thick, heavily notarized legal document. I slid it across the smooth marble island. It glided effortlessly, stopping perfectly in front of Estelle's resting hands. Marcus's bonus will not even cover the interest payments on the debt he just incurred, Estelle, I said, keeping my eyes locked firmly on hers. Because the money he stole from my accounts was not enough to keep Brad's collapsing Ponzi scheme afloat. Brad got desperate last month. He told Marcus that they needed a massive, immediate injection of capital to save the phantom mining farms and protect their initial investment. So your brilliant executive son did what he always does when he feels inadequate. He took the easiest, most destructive path available. Marcus let out a strangled gasp. "Maya, do not do this," he begged, his voice dropping to a frantic, pathetic whisper. "Please, Maya, do not show her that." I ignored him completely. I tapped the notarized document resting in front of Estelle. "Look down, Estelle," I commanded softly. "Read the bold text at the top of the page." Estelle slowly lowered her gaze. I watched her eyes scan the black ink. I watched the realization hit her like a physical, devastating blow. The proud, haughty color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking fragile, hollow, and suddenly very old. Her hands began to tremble so violently that the paper shook against the marble. "That is a secondary mortgage agreement," I stated clearly, making sure every single person in the room heard the absolute finality in my voice. 2 weeks ago, Marcus used his status as a co-signer on your estate to quietly take out a $400,000 loan against your pristine, paid-off suburban home. He handed every single penny of your equity over to Brad, and Brad immediately wired it to an untraceable offshore account to pay off angry investors threatening to go to the police. The air in the room vanished. The silence was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Chloe covered her mouth with both hands, tears welling in her eyes as the magnitude of her husband's crimes finally shattered her delusion. Brad stared at the floor, his face pale and slick with sweat. Estelle slowly lifted her head. The arrogant matriarch was gone. She turned slowly, her trembling body shifting to face her golden boy. Her voice, usually so loud and commanding, was a shattered, breathless whisper. "You mortgaged my house." Estelle's shriek tore through the kitchen, a sound so raw and guttural it made the expensive crystal pendants above the island vibrate. She lunged forward, her perfectly manicured hands curling into rigid claws as she closed the distance between herself and her son. The majestic, untouchable matriarch completely dissolved into a frantic, terrified woman staring down the barrel of total financial ruin. She grabbed Marcus by the collar of his ruined, sweat-stained linen shirt, shaking him with a sudden, violent strength that sent him stumbling backward. "My home." Marcus, Estelle screamed, spit flying from her lips as she shook him again. "The estate your father built from the ground up. The absolute cornerstone of our family wealth. You handed the deed to a cryptocurrency scammer. You signed away my sanctuary." Marcus shrank away, physically cowering under his mother's sudden violence. He threw his hands up in a desperate defensive posture, completely abandoning the alpha executive persona he had worn like a suit of armor for the past 2 years. He looked exactly like a frightened, cornered child trying to escape punishment. "It was not my fault," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. He practically tripped over his own feet trying to put the kitchen island between himself and Estelle. "Brad set the entire thing up. He told me it was just a temporary bridge loan, a minor liquidity measure to bypass a bureaucratic banking hold. Marcus thrust a trembling, accusatory finger directly at his brother-in-law, throwing him under the bus without a second of hesitation. Brad said the mining farms were caught in a temporary regulatory freeze. He promised me a guaranteed 200% return within 30 days. He swore on his life the money would be back in the estate account before the first mortgage payment was even due. He manipulated me, Mom. He used complex offshore banking jargon to confuse me. I was just trying to double our family portfolio. I was trying to secure our legacy and elevate us to the next tier of wealth. "Do not you dare put this on my husband!" Chloe screamed. She stepped directly between Marcus and Brad, shoving her brother hard in the chest. Her face was flushed with ugly defensive rage, her carefully maintained influencer aesthetic completely ruined by her snarling expression. "Brad is a visionary. You are just a greedy, incompetent middle manager who begged to be part of an exclusive investment circle. You practically forced Brad to take your money because you were so desperate to look like a high roller at your stupid golf club. You wanted the returns without doing any of the actual work." Chloe whipped her head around, fixing her furious, tear-filled glare on me. "And you?" Chloe snarled, her voice dripping with venom as she marched toward my side of the kitchen island. "You are a complete psychopath. You illegally hacked into private family financial records. You violated our digital privacy and committed corporate espionage. You snooped through our personal business just to construct this ridiculous paranoid narrative because you are insanely jealous of my marriage and my husband's ambition. You could not stand seeing us succeed, so you manufactured a crisis to tear us down." I remained perfectly still, watching the absolute destruction of the Washington family mythos unfold right in front of me. The curated image of elite, untouchable success had been entirely stripped away. They were no longer the sophisticated socialites who sipped vintage champagne and looked down their noses at my spreadsheet job. They were a pack of desperate, greedy narcissists tearing each other apart for scraps. The kitchen rapidly descended into absolute anarchy. Estelle turned her wrath on Brad, demanding he liquidate his assets immediately to pay off the mortgage, threatening to have him arrested for elder abuse and grand larceny. Brad shouted right back, his fake composure entirely gone, claiming Marcus signed the paperwork voluntarily and assumed all the financial risk as an accredited investor. Marcus and Chloe were locked in a vicious, ugly, screaming match, hurling decades of toxic sibling resentment at each other. "You are a fake!" Marcus screamed at his sister, his face purple with rage. "Your entire boutique brand is funded by my stolen money. You are a broke, talentless influencer married to a common thief. You do not even own the designer bags you post online." "At least my husband actually tried to build an empire," Chloe shrieked back, her voice echoing shrilly off the marble walls. "You are a pathetic coward who relies on his mommy and his plain, boring wife to fund his lifestyle. You are a fraud, Marcus. You have always been a fraud, and the only reason you ever had a dime is because Maya did all the heavy lifting while you played golf." Estelle was hyperventilating now, clutching her chest as she realized the true extent of the devastation. The house, the country club membership, the luxury cars, all of it was built on a crumbling foundation of deceit and stolen funds. "My legacy." Estelle wailed, her voice thick with genuine despair, leaning heavily against the refrigerator for support. "We will be laughing stocks. The entire congregation will know. We will be ruined in this city. We will have to sell everything." I watched them closely. They were so entirely consumed by their own selfish panic, their lost money, and their shattered reputations that they still had not asked a single question about my medical recovery or the beautiful newborn daughter sleeping just a few rooms away. Their true priorities were completely laid bare: money, status, and the desperate preservation of their own fragile egos. They would happily burn each other to the ground before accepting an ounce of personal accountability. I let them scream and point fingers for exactly 4 minutes. I let them exhaust their vocal cords. I let the ugly, undeniable truth of their character permeate every inch of the room until the air felt thick with their mutual hatred. Then I decided the show was finally over. I lifted my right hand high in the air and brought it down flat against the marble countertop with a sharp, deafening crack. The sound cut through the screaming like a physical blow. The shouting ceased instantly. 4 pairs of wide, terrified eyes snapped toward me, suddenly remembering who held the actual power in the room. I reached into the heavy black dossier and pulled out the divorce papers David had meticulously drafted that morning. I slid the thick stack of documents across the island, stopping them exactly where Brad's ruined contract had rested moments before. I picked up a heavy silver fountain pen from the cup holder and held it out, pointing the tip directly at my husband. "Sign the divorce papers, Marcus. You have 10 minutes to pack your bags." Marcus stared at the silver fountain pen resting on the pristine marble as if it were a venomous snake. The silence in the kitchen stretched, pulled taut by the sheer audacity of my command. Then a harsh, incredulous laugh erupted from his chest. He slapped the pen away. It skittered across the island and clattered onto the hardwood floor, rolling away into the shadows of the cabinetry. He crossed his arms, puffing out his chest to regain the alpha posture he had completely lost moments ago. "I am not going anywhere," Marcus snarled, his voice echoing with desperate bravado. "You do not get to snap your fingers and throw me out on the street. This is my house. This is marital property. I am the man of this house, and I have 50% equity in every single brick of this estate. You cannot legally evict your own husband just because you are throwing a postpartum tantrum." Estelle immediately stepped up beside him, her posture straightening as she rallied behind her golden boy. Her previous panic over her own mortgaged home was temporarily sidelined by the opportunity to put me in my place. Her elite societal conditioning kicked in, demanding she defend the patriarchal structure that gave her son his false authority. "Listen to him," Estelle commanded, pointing a perfectly manicured, trembling finger at my face. "You are completely out of your depth, Maya. You think you can just print out some fake divorce papers and strip my son of his rights. Marcus is the head of this household. He provides for you. He put the roof over your head. You are acting like a bitter, hysterical woman who cannot handle the fact that her husband made a minor financial misstep. You will sit down, you will apologize to my son, and you will figure out how to fix the mess you made of his bank accounts before I call the police and have you removed from his property." I did not raise my voice. I did not match their frantic, chaotic energy. I simply reached back into the black dossier and retrieved a single heavy sheet of embossed paper. I slid it across the island. It came to a stop directly over the divorce papers, the official state seal gleaming under the kitchen pendant lights. "Read the name on the deed," Marcus. I instructed, my tone flat and entirely devoid of emotion. Marcus scoffed, but his eyes darted down to the document. He scanned the heavy black text. His jaw slacked. The defiant, aggressive posture melted away in an instant, replaced by a hollow, terrified confusion. He blinked rapidly, leaning closer, as if the letters might magically rearrange themselves into a reality he could comprehend. "That is the property deed," I explained, enunciating every syllable with surgical precision. "Notice whose name is completely absent from the ownership line. I did not buy this house with marital funds. I bought this house in cash, entirely upfront, 6 months before we were even married. I purchased it through a blind corporate LLC, registered in Delaware, a holding company that I am the sole proprietor of." "What are you talking about?" Marcus whispered, his eyes frantically rereading the document. "I pay the mortgage. I write the check every single month. I wire the funds directly to the portal." "You write a check to a property management firm," I corrected smoothly. "A management firm that I own. You thought you were paying the mortgage, Marcus. In reality, you have been paying me rent for the last 2 years. You do not own a single brick of this estate. You have 0 equity. You are legally speaking a month-to-month tenant. And as the sole property owner, I am officially terminating your lease." The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. Chloe let out a tiny, stifled gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Brad simply stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and begrudging respect. He finally realized he had tried to scam a woman who was light years ahead of him in the financial food chain. Marcus looked like a man who had just watched his entire universe disintegrate. He gripped the edge of the marble island, his knuckles turning white, as he struggled to remain standing under the crushing weight of his own profound insignificance. Estelle, however, refused to surrender. If her financial leverage was completely gone, she would pivot to the only currency she had left in her arsenal: her social standing. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She slammed her hands onto the marble leaning across the island, as if she wanted to physically strike me. "You think you are so clever," Estelle hissed, her voice vibrating with a toxic, desperate venom. "You think you can humiliate my family and just walk away clean. You have no idea who you are dealing with, Maya. I built my reputation in this city for 30 years. I sit on the board of every major charity in Atlanta. I have the ear of every politician, every corporate sponsor, and every elite family in this state." I watched her rage, completely unbothered by her hollow threats. "I am hosting the Women of Excellence Gala at the country club next week." Estelle continued, her eyes burning with a destructive, unhinged fire. "It is the most exclusive event of the entire season. Every elite family, every corporate backer, every major socialite will be in attendance. When I take that podium, I am going to expose you. I am going to tell the entire city that you are a vindictive, unstable, scheming fraud who tried to destroy a respectable family out of pure spite. I will ruin your professional reputation. I will have your little data firm blacklisted by every executive in the Southeast." Estelle leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a vicious, venomous whisper. "When I am done telling the city about you, you won't be able to buy a loaf of bread in Atlanta." The front door slammed shut, taking Estelle's shrill, echoing threats with it. Within exactly 10 minutes, Marcus had dragged a single, hastily packed suitcase down the hardwood stairs. He did not look at me. He did not ask to see his daughter. He just scurried out the door, jumping into the passenger seat of Brad's leased sedan like a fleeing fugitive. The profound, beautiful silence of my home wrapped around me. 7 days passed. Estelle did not waste a single second. By Tuesday morning, my phone began vibrating off the kitchen counter. The onslaught started as a trickle of concerned text messages from my neighborhood book club and rapidly escalated into a deluge of frantic phone calls from the elite social circles of Atlanta. Estelle had effectively mobilized her entire network of country club socialites and church gossips. She went on an absolute scorched earth warpath. I sat at the very kitchen island where I had served Marcus his divorce papers, calmly sipping my morning espresso while reviewing the damage. My former friend Eleanor, a woman who thrived on suburban drama, forwarded me a voicemail Estelle had accidentally left on a massive group thread. I pressed play. Estelle's voice filled the pristine kitchen, trembling with perfectly manufactured theatrical tears. "It is a tragedy." Estelle sobbed through the phone speaker, her voice breaking with practiced precision. "Maya has suffered a complete and total psychotic break. The postpartum hormones have completely destroyed her mind. She emptied Marcus's bank accounts in a paranoid frenzy, stealing every dime he earned to support that child. We are absolutely terrified for the baby. She is completely unfit to be a mother. Marcus is working with the best attorneys in the state just to ensure his daughter's physical safety." I listened to the recording 3 times. She had hit every single buzzword designed to ruin a woman in our specific social strata. Crazy, thief, unfit mother. She was methodically laying the groundwork for the Women of Excellence Gala, ensuring that when I finally showed my face, I would be treated like a dangerous, infectious pariah. She was whispering to the neighborhood watch that Child Protective Services needed to be involved. She was telling the country club board that I had embezzled Marcus's hard-earned executive salary to fund my own delusions. She wanted me to be too ashamed to ever leave my house again. She wanted me to surrender. I deleted the voicemail. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel an ounce of panic, and I certainly did not call my legal team to draft a desperate cease and desist letter. Estelle wanted a public high society execution. She wanted a stage. I decided I was going to give her exactly what she asked for. However, I absolutely refused to attend my own execution wearing my usual conservative suburban uniform. I called my trusted, highly vetted private nanny to watch the baby for the afternoon. I grabbed my car keys and drove my paid-off luxury SUV straight to the most exclusive appointment-only designer boutique in Buckhead. For the past 2 years, I had dressed to blend in. I had worn the muted pastels and modest cuts that Estelle deemed appropriate for a junior executive's wife. I had actively dimmed my own light so Marcus could comfortably stand in the center of the room and pretend he was the sun. Those days were permanently over. The boutique manager recognized me immediately and locked the front doors, offering me a glass of champagne. I declined the drink and walked straight to the racks of evening wear imported directly from Milan. I bypassed the safe understated dresses and pulled out a custom emerald green silk gown. It was a masterpiece of aggressive elegance. The fabric draped like liquid metal. The neckline was sharp and plunging, and the high slit commanded absolute unapologetic attention. It was not a dress for a quiet, submissive wife. It was financial body armor. I stood on the velvet pedestal as the seamstress pinned the silk perfectly to my frame. I stared at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The woman looking back at me was no longer a shock absorber for the Washington family's toxic drama. She was a predator who had just finished playing with her food. "I will need this tailored and delivered to my estate by Thursday morning," I told the manager, handing over my heavy metal corporate card. "I have a very important gala to attend on Friday." I drove back to my peaceful, quiet home. The afternoon sun was casting long golden shadows across my manicured front lawn. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed the mail carrier had just dropped a stack of envelopes into my secure lockbox. I parked the car in the garage and walked to the front gate. I sorted through the usual junk mail and catalogs until I found exactly what I had been waiting for all week. It was a thick, rigid envelope sent via certified priority mail from the elite commercial real estate firm that managed the shell company I owned. I walked into my foyer, the heavy silence of the house greeting me like an old friend. I slid my manicured finger under the seal of the envelope and tore it open. I pulled out a crisp, heavy stack of legal documents bearing the official seal of the state of Georgia. I read the bold, capitalized letters printed across the top of the very first page. It was the finalized, expedited notice of foreclosure. Because Marcus had used Estelle's property as collateral for Brad's massive fraudulent cryptocurrency loan, and because Brad's offshore accounts had completely defaulted, the bank had moved with lethal, unprecedented speed. I held the deed to Estelle's prized multi-million-dollar ancestral mansion directly in my hands. The estate she bragged about at every single social gathering. The house she claimed was the bedrock of her untouchable legacy. It no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the bank, and through my corporate acquisitions, it effectively belonged to me. I looked down at the official seal, feeling a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Estelle wanted to stand at a podium and tell the entire city that I would never be able to buy a loaf of bread in Atlanta. She had absolutely no idea she was currently sleeping under my roof. Friday evening arrived with the suffocating humidity typical of a deep southern summer. But inside the grand ballroom of the exclusive Buckhead Country Club, the climate was strictly controlled and dripping with generational wealth. The Women of Excellence Gala was in full swing, operating at the peak of its annual grandeur. Waitstaff in crisp white jackets glided seamlessly across the polished terrazzo floors, carrying heavy silver trays loaded with beluga caviar, imported truffles, and delicate flutes of vintage champagne. A live jazz quartet played softly from a raised velvet stage, their smooth, melodic notes providing the perfect acoustic backdrop for the hushed, ruthless networking of the city's most powerful socialites. The air was thick with the scent of expensive, heavy perfumes and the delicate clinking of fine crystal. Massive chandeliers the size of compact cars hung from the vaulted hand-painted ceilings, casting a brilliant, diamond-hard light over the vast sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. This was the absolute apex of Atlanta high society. It was an environment designed exclusively to intimidate outsiders, a fiercely guarded, glittering fortress where reputations were forged in gold or shattered into dust before the first course was even served to the guests. At the absolute dead center of the ballroom sat the coveted VIP table. Estelle occupied the head seat like a reigning monarch, presiding over a deeply sympathetic royal court. She wore a severe high-necked black gown that perfectly conveyed her manufactured grief without sacrificing an ounce of her usual intimidating glamour. She was actively holding court, surrounded by a tight, captivated cluster of local politicians' wives, charity board members, and old money matriarchs who hung on her every single word. Estelle dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed silk handkerchief, playing the role of the tragic, long-suffering mother to absolute perfection. She leaned in close, her voice a hushed theatrical whisper meticulously designed to carry just far enough to infect the neighboring tables with her venom. She spun a masterclass of absolute fiction, painting a devastating portrait of a family torn apart by a sudden violent mental collapse. She whispered tragic tales about frozen bank accounts, inexplicably stolen assets, and the profound, terrifying grief of watching a beloved daughter-in-law completely lose her grip on reality. The surrounding women gasped loudly on cue, clutching their heavy pearl necklaces and offering their deepest, most sincere sympathies to the brave, stoic woman holding her entire family together through an unimaginable, horrific crisis. Sitting directly to Estelle's right was Marcus, playing the role of the devastated, victimized husband with sickening, Oscar-worthy dedication. He had strategically foregone his usual aggressive corporate swagger, opting instead for a slumped, defeated posture that begged for maternal comfort from every wealthy woman in his line of sight. He swirled a glass of neat amber bourbon, staring blankly into the liquid as if desperately searching for answers to a tragedy he simply could not comprehend. When approached by curious country club board members or sympathetic heiresses, Marcus offered a brave, incredibly sad smile. He spoke in low, trembling tones about his fierce dedication to his marital vows, his desperate attempts to get his unstable wife the intense psychiatric help she so clearly needed, and his overriding desperate concern for the safety of his innocent newborn daughter. He completely and maliciously omitted the fact that he had not asked to see his daughter a single time since being thrown out of the house. The elite crowd swallowed every single lie without hesitation, wrapping Marcus in a collective protective embrace, completely convinced he was a living saint, suffering under the crushing burden of a deeply disturbed, dangerous spouse. Pacing the far perimeter of the ballroom, hovering nervously near the open bar, were Brad and Chloe. They were completely isolated from the prestigious VIP table, sweating profusely through their expensive leased clothes in a state of absolute, unadulterated panic. The impending bank foreclosure on Estelle's home meant their offshore shell company was completely dead in the water, and their angry, defrauded investors were closing in fast. They were mingling with aggressive, manic desperation, cornering any wealthy guest who made the mistake of making eye contact with them. Brad puffed out his chest, waving his hands frantically as he pitched his fraudulent cryptocurrency mining farms to a captive group of elderly orthopedic surgeons who barely understood the internet. Chloe stood rigidly beside him, her smile stretched so incredibly tight it looked physically painful, nodding vigorously while her panicked eyes constantly scanned the room for easier targets. They were no longer trying to build a global empire. They were desperately trying to hook one last wealthy mark to fund their immediate midnight escape from the country before the federal indictments inevitably dropped. The grand antique grandfather clock situated in the main foyer struck exactly 8 o'clock. The main event was scheduled to begin. Estelle rose gracefully from her seat at the VIP table, preparing to make her way toward the podium to deliver her highly anticipated keynote address. She was completely ready to publicly cement my total destruction. The jazz quartet brought their song to a soft, lingering close. A heavy hush naturally fell over the ballroom as the hundreds of guests turned their attention toward the stage. But before Estelle could take a single step forward, a heavy metallic thud echoed violently from the back of the room. The massive, solid mahogany doors of the grand ballroom swung violently open, hitting the brass stops with a crack that made several guests physically jump in their seats. The remaining ambient noise evaporated instantly. The room fell into a dead electric silence. Every single head turned toward the entrance. I stepped over the threshold, wearing the custom liquid emerald green silk gown. The expensive fabric caught the brilliant light of the chandeliers shimmering like armor as I stood perfectly still surveying the stunned crowd. The collective gasp from the room was genuine this time, not manufactured. I did not walk in alone. I was flanked on either side by two towering, heavily armed private security guards. I moved forward, letting the heavy mahogany doors swing shut behind my guards with a resounding heavy thud that echoed like a judge's gavel across the vaulted ceiling. My emerald silk gown swept across the polished terrazzo floor, trailing behind me like liquid glass. The absolute suffocating silence of the room shattered instantly, replaced by a frantic buzzing wave of hushed voices and sharp intakes of breath. I kept my posture impossibly straight, my chin elevated, my gaze fixed dead ahead on the VIP table. The sea of country club elites physically parted for me, creating a wide, unobstructed path through the crowded ballroom. Women who had just spent the last hour offering their heartfelt condolences over my supposed psychotic breakdown now stared with their mouths hanging open, their delicate champagne flutes frozen halfway to their lips. I did not look unhinged. I did not look like a frail, exhausted mother, drowning in postpartum delusions or unmedicated paranoia. I looked like a woman who could buy the entire building, raze it to the ground, and pave over the ashes without checking her bank balance. Across the room, standing near a towering swan ice sculpture by the open bar, Brad and Chloe completely froze. Brad actually dropped his cocktail napkin onto the wet floor. He had been in the middle of aggressively pitching his fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme to an elderly hospital director. Now his mouth hung slack, his eyes darting frantically toward the service exit doors. Chloe gripped his arm, her knuckles white, her face draining of all color beneath her heavy makeup. They recognized the predator's calculating gleam in my eye. They knew exactly what kind of financial firepower I possessed, and seeing me walk into their final, desperate hunting ground triggered their ultimate survival instincts. They shrank back into the deep shadows of the floral arrangements, completely terrified of drawing my attention. I directed my path straight toward the center of the room, aiming directly for the VIP table. Estelle had risen halfway out of her chair. Her meticulously crafted mask of the grieving, long-suffering matriarch disintegrated into a portrait of raw, unadulterated panic. The sudden appearance of the very woman she had just finished burying in the court of public opinion was a direct lethal threat to her social survival. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the edge of the linen-draped table so tightly her knuckles turned a stark, bony white. She looked around at the faces of her powerful friends, the wives of senators and banking tycoons, realizing instantly that my calm, calculated entrance was actively destroying her carefully spun web of lies. I was not wearing a hospital gown. I was not screaming at invisible enemies. Her shock rapidly mutated into explosive, uncontrollable rage. She slapped her hands flat against the table and stood up fully, her chest heaving, her heavy diamond necklace rattling against her collarbone. "What is the meaning of this?" Estelle shrieked, her voice cracking the sophisticated atmosphere of the ballroom like a whip. Her shrill tone echoed off the massive crystal chandeliers, completely devoid of the elegant, measured cadence she usually employed. "Guards, country club security. I want this woman removed immediately. She is a delusional, trespassing woman who poses a direct threat to the safety of these guests. Get her out of my sight." The venue's regular security detail, older men in cheap blue blazers, hesitated. They glanced nervously between Estelle's frantic gesturing and the massive stone-faced private contractors flanking my sides. My guards wore custom-tailored suits that hid the distinct, bulky outlines of tactical gear. They did not move a single muscle, projecting an aura of lethal professionalism that the country club staff wanted absolutely no part of. Sensing the total failure of his mother's command, Marcus snapped out of his own paralyzed shock. The pathetic slumped posture he had been faking all night vanished in an instant. He puffed out his chest, desperately trying to project the alpha male authority he had already permanently lost in my kitchen a week ago. He marched aggressively across the open floor, his face flushed an angry, volatile red. He was sweating heavily, beads of perspiration gleaming on his forehead under the harsh chandelier lights. The optics of the situation were spiraling entirely out of his control, and he resorted to the only tactic he knew: physical intimidation. He reached me before I could make it to the center table, stepping directly into my path to block my momentum. Maya, what is wrong with you? Marcus hissed, keeping his voice low but completely laced with venomous panic. He leaned in close, attempting to tower over me. You are having an episode. You are embarrassing yourself in front of the most important people in this city. You need to leave right now before I have you arrested for trespassing and call a psychiatric transport to drag you away. He did not wait for my response. He lunged forward, his hand shooting out to tightly grip my bare arm, fully intending to physically drag me out the side exit like a misbehaving hysterical child. His fingers never even brushed my skin. The private security guard on my right moved with terrifying lightning-fast precision. He stepped smoothly between us, his massive frame forming an impenetrable concrete wall. He clamped his heavy hand down on Marcus's reaching wrist, stopping my former husband dead in his tracks. The guard did not say a single word. He simply applied enough immediate crushing pressure to Marcus's wrist to make Marcus gasp out loud and physically buckle at the knees. Marcus staggered backward, cradling his arm against his chest, his eyes wide with a sudden profound realization of his own utter powerlessness. I did not break my stride. I did not even glance down at him as I walked effortlessly past his retreating, humiliated figure. I glided straight past Estelle, who was vibrating with a toxic mixture of fear and fury, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. I walked directly up the short carpeted steps of the velvet stage, completely ignoring the frozen jazz musicians who respectfully backed away from their instruments. I stepped up to the polished acrylic podium that had been prepared for Estelle's grand keynote address. I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the sleek silver microphone. A short, sharp burst of feedback echoed through the room, demanding absolute silence. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. I am not trespassing, Estelle. I stated, my voice projecting clearly and flawlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system ringing in the ears of every single elite guest in the room. I am the platinum sponsor of this event. The word platinum hit the silent ballroom like a physical shockwave. Estelle physically recoiled from the microphone, her face draining of all color, until she looked like a wax mannequin. She stumbled back a half step, her high heels catching on the carpeted stage. Her eyes darted wildly toward the charity board of directors sitting at the front table. The chairwoman of the committee, a terrifyingly severe woman who held the ultimate power over the country club's finances, gave Estelle a slow, confirming nod. The check had cleared. The sponsorship was real. The murmurs erupted instantly. It was a vicious hissing sound that swept through the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. A platinum sponsorship for the Women of Excellence Gala cost $250,000 in liquid cash. It was a tier reserved exclusively for major banking conglomerates and international airline corporations. It was not a tier for a hysterical, unemployed housewife. I kept my grip relaxed on the microphone. I did not raise my voice to compete with the rising tide of gossip. I simply waited. Within seconds, the sheer force of my unbothered posture commanded the room back into absolute silence. Every eye remained locked on me. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice smooth, lethal, and entirely calm. "I know many of you have been entertained tonight by a deeply tragic, entirely fabricated narrative. You have been told a compelling story about a poor, victimized husband and his mentally unstable, financially abusive wife. You have been told that I suffered a complete psychotic break, that I emptied bank accounts, and that I pose a danger to my own family." I stepped out from behind the podium, moving to the very edge of the stage. The emerald silk of my gown caught the chandelier light, shimmering like a weapon. For the past 2 years, the woman standing behind me has introduced me to this prestigious room as a simple freelancer. I continued, not even bothering to look back at Estelle. I was presented as a quiet, unassuming girl who dabbled in spreadsheets from the guest room to pass the time while her brilliant husband carried the crushing financial burden of our household. It was a very convenient, very comforting lie that allowed certain people to feel superior. I let my gaze sweep across the faces of the city's most powerful politicians and corporate titans. I saw the sudden dawning realization in their eyes. They were looking at the posture of a woman who wielded absolute authority. Allow me to properly introduce myself, I said, enunciating every single syllable with surgical precision. My name is Maya. I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of Apex Cybernetics. We specialize in predictive data architecture and proprietary cybersecurity protocols for international financial institutions. A sharp collective gasp rippled through the front tables. Several powerful men in the audience suddenly sat up perfectly straight. Apex Cybernetics was not a secret in the corporate world. It was a rapidly ascending, highly aggressive disruptor in the tech sector. They knew the name. They just had absolutely no idea that the silent, smiling wife they had ignored at country club mixers for 2 years was the architect behind it. I built that firm entirely from the ground up, I stated, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I built it quietly, methodically, and without a single dollar of outside help from anyone in this room or this family. And just last month, Apex Cybernetics officially closed a Series B funding round with a verified market valuation of exactly $50 million. The ballroom completely unraveled. The hushed whispers exploded into genuine, uncontained chaos. $50 million. The number hung in the heavy perfumed air, completely obliterating every single lie Estelle had spent the last week meticulously planting. You could practically hear the social hierarchy of Atlanta violently realigning itself. The charity board members who had just been comforting Estelle now looked at her with blatant, unapologetic disgust. She had not brought a victim to their gala. She had attempted to publicly humiliate an industry titan. I looked down at the ballroom floor. Marcus was still standing exactly where my security guard had stopped him. He looked incredibly small. His face was slack, his jaw literally hanging open as he stared up at me. His brain was desperately trying to process the magnitude of his own profound stupidity. He had spent years treating me like a financial burden, mocking my late nights at the computer and demanding I cater to his mediocre corporate ambitions. He had thrown away a $50 million empire for a cheap affair and a fraudulent cryptocurrency scam. He looked like a man who had just realized he stepped off a cliff and was waiting for the ground to hit him. I descended the velvet steps of the stage, my security detail moving in perfect silent synchronization to clear a path. The crowd parted for me with newfound absolute reverence. I stopped exactly 3 feet in front of Marcus. I could smell the cheap bourbon on his breath and the sour, acidic stench of his panic. "You stood in my kitchen and told me you were the provider, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a conversational volume that the surrounding VIPs leaned in desperately to hear. "You claimed you were the man of the house. You wore the expensive suits I bought, drove the luxury cars I paid for, and played golf at this very club, using the membership fees I secretly subsidized. You built your entire identity on a mountain of my money." Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He tried to speak to formulate some kind of defense, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He was a hollow, empty shell of a man stripped of every single illusion he had ever possessed. I tilted my head, looking at him with nothing but pure Arctic indifference. "Marcus, tell your friends here about your executive job. Or rather, tell them about the job you lost yesterday." The air in the ballroom grew so thin that the clinking of a single dropped ice cube sounded like a gunshot. Marcus opened his mouth, but only a dry, pathetic rasp escaped his throat. He looked desperately toward Estelle, his eyes pleading for a lifeline, but his mother was paralyzed, her gaze locked on the terrifying reality of my corporate authority. He took a stumbling step backward, realizing the elite crowd he had been charming all evening was now staring at him with cold, predatory curiosity. I did not let him catch his breath. I explained the exact mechanics of his professional execution. Apex Cybernetics had utilized a significant portion of our recent capital influx to orchestrate a highly aggressive, completely invisible hostile takeover of his employer. By the time the stock market opened on Thursday morning, my holding company had successfully secured 51% of the voting shares. I was no longer his quiet, submissive wife waiting at home. I was the newly minted majority shareholder, the supreme executive authority holding his entire corporate division in the palm of my hand. The corporate titans sitting at the surrounding VIP tables murmured in grim, begrudging respect. They recognized a flawless, bloodless boardroom slaughter when they saw one. I continued, my voice echoing evenly across the vast room, explaining that my very first act as the controlling entity was initiating an immediate, merciless forensic audit of Marcus's specific department. My private accounting team had cracked open his restricted ledgers and bypassed his pathetic digital firewalls in less than an hour. What my analysts found was not just standard corporate mismanagement. It was a breathtaking, reckless labyrinth of financial crimes. Marcus had established an elaborate network of phantom vendors and shell contractors. He had been systematically bleeding his own company dry for over 2 years. I told the captivated ballroom exactly how their golden boy had funded his grand illusion of supremacy. The imported silk suits, the leased German sports cars, the extravagant bar tabs at this very country club. None of it came from his legitimate salary. He was a common thief playing dress-up with stolen corporate capital to satisfy his mother's insatiable hunger for high society status. I watched the realization spread across the faces of the country club board members. They were calculating the exact amount of stolen money Marcus had spent in their dining rooms. Estelle tried to interject, her voice a weak, trembling whisper, as she attempted to deny the allegations, but the damage was already terminal. Then I delivered the absolute final blow. I looked directly past Marcus, locking eyes with Brad, who was currently trying to shrink into the shadows near the swan ice sculpture. I announced that the audit revealed Marcus's most recent, most desperate maneuver. Facing a quarterly financial review he knew he could not survive, Marcus had embezzled the last remaining millions from his departmental operating budget and wired the funds directly into Brad's offshore cryptocurrency accounts. He had gambled stolen corporate money on a fake digital asset scheme, praying for a miraculous, impossible return that would let him replace the stolen funds before the auditors arrived. Brad physically choked on his drink, doubling over as he realized I possessed the exact digital paper trail required to send them both to a federal penitentiary. The offshore accounts were no longer a secret. I had the routing numbers, the IP addresses, and the encrypted transaction logs. The reaction from the elite crowd was absolute, unforgiving disgust. In this room, marital infidelity was a minor scandal, but stealing corporate funds was the ultimate, unforgivable sin. The wealthy matriarchs who had just been comforting Estelle now looked at her with pure, venomous revulsion. Estelle reached out a trembling hand toward the charity board chairwoman, desperate to maintain her standing, but the older woman coldly turned her back and stepped away. In a matter of seconds, Estelle Washington was permanently banished from Atlanta high society. Her 30 years of careful networking evaporated into thin air. The crushing weight of total annihilation finally broke Marcus. The arrogant executive facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He realized he had no money, no home, no career, and absolutely no legal defense. His legs simply gave out beneath him. He dropped heavily to his knees right there on the polished terrazzo floor, his tailored trousers pooling around his ankles. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving as he sobbed uncontrollably. He was a broken, pathetic shell of a man, weeping loudly in front of the very socialites he had spent his entire adult life trying to impress. Across the room, Chloe finally snapped out of her terrified paralysis. Seeing her brother completely destroyed and her own financial future actively burning to the ground, she shoved her way past the stunned guests. Her face was contorted with an ugly, unhinged rage, her hands balled into fists as she prepared to scream at me for dismantling her family's empire. She opened her mouth, inhaling deeply to unleash her fury. But before a single sound could escape her lips, the ambient lighting in the ballroom suddenly shifted. Vivid, sweeping flashes of intense red and blue light violently pierced through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, washing over the crystal chandeliers in a frantic, rhythmic strobe. The blinding, unmistakable lights of multiple police cruisers had just surrounded the entire country club. The rhythmic, strobing glare of the police cruisers outside transformed the opulent grand ballroom into a surreal, chaotic crime scene. The red and blue lights fractured against the massive crystal chandeliers, casting violent, jagged shadows across the terrified faces of Atlanta's most powerful elite. The ambient murmur of the crowd died instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating dread. Nobody moved. The jazz quartet on the velvet stage remained perfectly still. The heavy mahogany double doors at the main entrance, which my security had allowed to swing shut, were thrown open with a force that rattled the brass hinges. 6 federal agents strode into the room. They wore dark windbreakers with stark yellow lettering across the back, a joint task force of the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Their heavy tactical boots thudded against the polished terrazzo floor, a harsh militaristic rhythm completely alien to the delicate acoustics of a country club gala. They moved in a tight, highly coordinated formation, their faces set in grim, unyielding expressions. The venue's regular security guards, who had been completely useless against my private detail, practically flattened themselves against the walls to get out of the way. The sea of wealthy guests scrambled backward, pulling their silk gowns and bespoke tuxedos out of the aisle to avoid even brushing against the incoming authorities. The agents marched straight down the center of the room. They completely bypassed Marcus, who was still kneeling in a pathetic, weeping heap on the floor. They walked right past my podium, not even casting a glance in my direction. Their target was already locked. They converged directly on the swan ice sculpture by the open bar. Brad was trapped. He looked frantically to his left and his right, his eyes wide and white-rimmed like a cornered animal, but there was absolutely no avenue of escape. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying temples, stepped squarely into Brad's personal space and flashed a gold badge. I watched the color drain entirely from Brad's face, leaving his skin a sickly, pallid gray. He raised his hands in a weak defensive gesture, stammering out fractured, nonsensical sentences about misunderstandings and legitimate digital asset ventures. He was desperately trying to deploy the smooth, confident crypto bro persona that had fooled so many gullible investors, but his voice was trembling uncontrollably. I leaned back into the silver microphone on the podium. My voice sliced cleanly through Brad's pathetic stammering, echoing over the heads of the federal agents. "There is no misunderstanding, Brad," I announced, projecting a chilling, absolute calm. When my forensic accounting team cracked Marcus's department ledgers and traced the embezzled millions to your offshore accounts, I did not just keep that information for my own personal leverage. I compiled every single IP address, every encrypted transaction log, and the entire hidden ownership structure of your fraudulent shell companies. I packaged it into a very neat, undeniable dossier and hand-delivered it directly to the federal prosecutor's office. The entire ballroom let out a synchronized, horrified gasp. The elite guests suddenly realized the sheer terrifying scope of my retaliation. I had not just ruined a career, I had actively orchestrated a federal takedown. I watched as the lead agent grabbed Brad's arms, spinning him around with brutal efficiency. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed loudly through the silent room. Brad gasped in pain as his arms were wrenched behind his back, the expensive fabric of his leased tuxedo jacket straining and tearing at the shoulder seam. The agent began reciting the Miranda rights in a flat, bored monotone, listing charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and grand larceny. The ultimate destruction of Brad's manufactured high-rolling lifestyle was absolute and physical. He was no longer an empire builder. He was a common criminal being restrained in front of the very people he had spent the last 2 hours trying to scam. The sight of the steel cuffs snapping shut around her husband's wrists finally broke Chloe's paralyzed trance. The tight, physically painful smile she had worn all evening contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged hysteria. She let out a piercing, guttural scream that forced several guests to physically cover their ears. She lunged forward, her manicured hands clawing desperately at the federal agent's windbreakers, but a female agent easily intercepted her, shoving her back with a firm practice palm to the sternum. Denied access to her husband. Chloe spun around to face the wealthy crowd. Her heavy makeup was smearing down her cheeks, her carefully styled hair flying wildly around her face. She spotted the elderly hospital director and the group of orthopedic surgeons Brad had been pitching his scam to just minutes earlier. "Do something!" Chloe shrieked, her voice tearing at the seams. "Call your lawyers. You have connections. Call the governor. Tell them there has been a mistake. My husband is an innovator. He is a genius. You all know him. The reaction from the Atlanta elite was swift and merciless. The wealthy patrons physically recoiled from her. The surgeons took several large steps backward, pulling their wives behind them, their faces twisted in absolute revulsion. The hospital director turned his back entirely, refusing to even make eye contact with her. In their world, association with federal financial crimes was a highly contagious disease. They treated Chloe as if she were radioactive. The isolation was instantaneous and complete. The glittering fortress of high society had just slammed its gates shut right in her face. Seeing her daughter spinning wildly out of control, begging a room full of disgusted billionaires for salvation, Estelle finally grasped the catastrophic reality of her situation. Her son was a confessed embezzler weeping on the floor. Her son-in-law was being hauled away in federal handcuffs. Her daughter was publicly unraveling. Estelle's entire manufactured dynasty was burning to ash right before her eyes. The maternal instinct she had always faked instantly evaporated, replaced entirely by a desperate, pathetic drive for self-preservation. Estelle took a rapid, stumbling step backward away from the VIP table, her hip knocking a heavy wooden chair to the floor with a loud clatter. She raised both her hands, palms facing outward toward the center of the room, her eyes wide with terror as she stared at the federal agents. "They have nothing to do with me!" Estelle cried out, her voice shrill and trembling as she violently abandoned her own children to save herself. The sheer callousness of her declaration hung in the air, a toxic cloud that finally extinguished whatever microscopic shred of sympathy the room still held for her. Even the hardened political wives and the cutthroat real estate developers blanched at the sight of a mother so instantly and ruthlessly discarding her own flesh and blood to preserve her social standing. Chloe stopped screaming, her tear-streaked face freezing in an expression of absolute devastated betrayal as she stared at the woman who gave birth to her. The federal agents did not care about the family drama. They forcefully guided Brad, who was now quietly sobbing, toward the grand exit, leaving Chloe standing utterly alone in a wide circle of empty space. I did not let the moment settle. I stepped down from the raised velvet stage, my security detail parting the remaining crowd like the Red Sea. My heels clicked with a steady metronomic rhythm against the terrazzo floor. I walked directly toward the VIP table, my gaze locked onto Estelle like a predator zeroing in on a mortally wounded target. Estelle took another stumbling step backward, her spine hitting the edge of a marble pillar. She looked like a trapped animal, her chest heaving, her eyes darting frantically for an exit that did not exist. "You are right, Estelle," I said, my voice gliding smoothly over the heavy silence of the ballroom. "They have nothing to do with you. You have successfully abandoned your daughter to the federal government. But the problem is, you have absolutely nowhere to go." Estelle pulled her shoulders back desperately, trying to summon the haughty, aristocratic matriarch persona that had terrorized me for the past 10 years. She lifted her chin, her heavily jeweled neck trembling. "How dare you speak to me that way?" she spat, though her voice completely lacked its usual venomous bite. "I am Estelle Washington. I will leave this ridiculous circus and go back to my estate. I will sit in my home, call my private attorneys, and watch you burn for this outrage." I let out a soft, echoing laugh that sent a visible shiver down her spine. The utter delusion of her arrogance was almost pitiable. I took another step forward, invading her personal space, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "Your home?" I repeated, letting the words roll slowly off my tongue. "Let us talk about your magnificent, historic Buckhead estate, Estelle. Let us talk about the fortress you used to make me feel small. You see, when Marcus realized his fraudulent cryptocurrency investments with Brad were completely imploding, he grew desperate. Stealing from his corporate operating budget was not enough to cover the massive gaping holes in their offshore accounts. He needed a massive influx of clean, untraceable liquid capital to keep the margin calls at bay." I shifted my gaze to Marcus, who was still kneeling on the floor. He let out a pathetic, strangled whimper and curled his body inward, trying to make himself as small as physically possible. Estelle looked down at her son, a new terrible dread dawning on her face. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Marcus, what did you do? He leveraged the only asset your family had left, I explained, drawing her horrified attention back to me. He used the comprehensive power of attorney you blindly signed over to him 3 years ago. You gave him total control over your finances because you believed he was the brilliant man of the house. He went behind your back and took out a massive predatory secondary mortgage on your estate. He drained every single ounce of equity you had built up over 4 decades and wired it directly into the exact same offshore shell companies the FBI is currently seizing from Brad. Estelle clutched her chest, her breathing becoming shallow and erratic. No, she gasped. No, the bank would have notified me. I would have received letters. I would have known. You did receive letters, I corrected her calmly. You received dozens of certified notices, default warnings, and pre-foreclosure declarations. But you were far too busy managing your country club social calendar, attending charity luncheons, and planting vicious rumors about my mental health to bother opening your own mail. Marcus intercepted the rest. When the tech firm fired him yesterday, the bank instantly called in the loan. Your historic estate went into active, unrecoverable foreclosure exactly 48 hours ago. The entire ballroom was completely mesmerized by the absolute destruction of the Washington dynasty. The silence was absolute, broken only by Marcus's quiet, pathetic sobbing. Estelle shook her head violently side to side, her perfectly coiffed hair falling out of place. She refused to accept the reality of her total ruin. I will call the bank president, she stammered, her hands grasping wildly at the empty air. We play tennis. He is a personal friend. I will have the loan restructured. I will fix this. You cannot call the bank, Estelle, I said, delivering the final fatal strike with ruthless precision, because the bank does not own your debt anymore. When the foreclosure hit the private registry yesterday morning, a real estate acquisition firm swooped in and bought the distressed debt in its entirety, paying entirely in cash. Estelle froze, her eyes widening as the horrific truth finally crashed down upon her. She looked at my liquid emerald gown, my private security guards, and the icy, unyielding expression on my face. That acquisition firm is a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex Cybernetics, I stated softly. I reached into my sleek emerald silk clutch. My fingers found the crisp, heavy parchment paper waiting inside. I pulled out the legally binding, fully executed foreclosure deed. I held it up for a fraction of a second, letting the gold-embossed seal catch the brilliant light of the chandeliers, ensuring every wealthy guest in the room could see exactly what it was. Then, with a casual flick of my wrist, I dropped the heavy document directly onto Estelle's pristine, untouched dinner plate. It landed with a soft slap right next to her silver fork and her portion of beluga caviar. Your mansion belongs to me now. You have 24 hours to vacate my property. The heavy embossed parchment landed on the fine bone china with a sharp, dismissive slap. Estelle stared at the foreclosure deed as if it were a live grenade placed directly into her lap. The last drops of color drained entirely from her perfectly powdered face, leaving her skin a hollow, terrifying gray. Her mouth opened and closed in a silent, suffocating gasp. The arrogant matriarch who had dictated the social laws of Atlanta for decades simply short-circuited. Her knees buckled beneath the weight of her emerald silk gown. She reached out a desperate, trembling hand toward the women she had played tennis and sipped champagne with for 20 years. It was the most brutal, instantaneous rejection I had ever witnessed. The wealthy socialites did not just ignore her silent plea for help, they actively recoiled. They pulled their expensive clutches tightly to their chests and took synchronized, deliberate steps backward. Estelle Washington crumpled completely, her body folding like a discarded puppet. She hit the polished terrazzo floor in a dead faint. Her heavy pearl necklace snapped against the hard stones, scattering white beads across the tiles, but not a single person in that crowded ballroom moved an inch to catch her. A few feet away, Marcus did not even register his mother falling unconscious beside him. He remained trapped in his own personal hell, kneeling in the center of the room, with his face buried in his hands. His broad shoulders heaved violently with every ragged, wet sob that tore from his throat. The polished, untouchable corporate executive was completely gone. He was nothing more than a broken, pathetic shell of a man drowning in the absolute certainty of his own destruction. He had traded his career, his marriage, and his freedom for the desperate illusion of superiority, and now he had absolutely nothing left but ruined tailored trousers and a pending federal indictment. The sound of his weeping echoed off the high ceilings, a miserable soundtrack to the end of his dynasty. Across the ballroom, the federal agents showed zero patience for the unfolding family drama. They yanked Brad forward by the steel chains binding his wrists. His custom Italian leather shoes scrambled for purchase on the smooth floor as they hauled him roughly toward the grand exit. Brad looked back over his shoulder, his eyes locking onto mine for one final terrifying second. The smug, invincible cryptocurrency kingpin was gone, replaced by a terrified criminal realizing he was about to spend the best years of his life in a federal penitentiary. The agents shoved him violently out the double doors, dragging him directly into the chaotic flashing strobe lights of the police blockade outside. Chloe trailed wildly behind the procession, a completely unhinged wailing mess. She stumbled blindly over the hem of her designer gown, her shrieks bouncing harshly off the crystal chandeliers. She threw her hands out toward the VIP tables, sobbing uncontrollably, begging the crowd for an intervention, a character witness, a lawyer, anything that could stop the nightmare. But the Atlanta elite are ruthless, calculated self-preservationists. They knew exactly when a ship was sinking, and they were experts at jumping overboard. The entire room turned their backs on her in complete synchronized unison. The ballroom instantly transformed into a sea of cold shoulders and averted eyes. Vicious whispers hissed through the crowd like dry leaves catching fire. The murmurs carried sharp, unforgiving judgments. The wealthy patrons were already actively stripping the Washington name from their charity boards, tearing up their joint country club memberships, and aggressively recalculating their own social hierarchies to ensure no one thought they were associated with the disgraced family. The Washingtons had become a toxic, cautionary tale in the span of 30 minutes. I watched the powerful society matrons pull their husbands away by their suit sleeves, aggressively directing them toward the secondary exits and kitchen corridors to avoid being photographed anywhere near the developing crime scene. The isolation was absolute. The glittering, impenetrable fortress of high society that Estelle had spent her entire adult life building had just slammed its heavy iron gates shut right in her family's face. They were banished, bankrupt, destroyed. I stood at the podium for one final glorious moment, surveying the absolute wreckage of my toxic in-laws. The empire they had built on lies systematic theft and unyielding cruelty was completely eradicated. They had no money left to hide behind. They had no freedom left to leverage. They had absolutely zero social status left to protect them. The universe had balanced the scales, and I had been the instrument of their total ruin. I reached out with a steady hand and gently unclipped the silver microphone from the stand. I laid it softly onto the velvet podium, the quiet thud signaling the definitive end of my performance. I did not look back at Marcus sobbing on the floor. I did not glance at Estelle lying unconscious amid her scattered pearls. I signaled to my lead security guard with a brief, sharp nod. My private detail instantly closed in around me, forming an impenetrable professional wall of black suits. I stepped off the velvet stage, my head held high, my posture immaculate. I walked straight down the center aisle, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the floor. The remaining crowd parted silently, stepping back to give me a wide, respectful berth. I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air, leaving the burning, irreparable wreckage of the Washington dynasty far behind me. 6 months later, the ashes of that explosive night had finally settled into a permanent, inescapable reality. The swift, brutal hand of justice had not just leveled the Washington family, it had fundamentally rewritten their entire existence. Brad's cryptocurrency empire dissolved into a highly publicized federal indictment that made national headlines. His team of expensive defense lawyers abandoned him the moment his fraudulent accounts were frozen. He was currently serving an 8-year sentence in a medium-security federal penitentiary. The custom Italian silk suits he loved to flaunt had been replaced by a stiff, shapeless khaki jumpsuit. There were no more swan ice sculptures, no VIP bottle service, and no fawning investors. His daily routine now consisted of rigid head counts, awful cafeteria food, and the soul-crushing realization that his silver tongue held absolutely no currency behind cold concrete walls. The man who thought he could outsmart the Securities and Exchange Commission was now just another inmate number entirely forgotten by the fast-moving financial world he once claimed to rule. Without Brad's stolen corporate money to fund her extravagant lifestyle, Chloe experienced a financial freefall that shattered her fragile manufactured ego. Her luxury SUVs were immediately repossessed. Her designer handbags and diamond jewelry were seized and auctioned to pay off a fraction of her mounting legal fees. Today, she was living in a bleak, desperately cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, where the faint smell of bleach and old cigarette smoke clung permanently to the peeling wallpaper. To cover her weekly rent, the former high society princess was working a minimum wage retail job at a discount clothing store. She spent 8 hours a day on her tired feet, aggressively folding neon polyester shirts and enduring the harsh reprimands of a store manager who was 10 years her junior. The manicured hands that used to hold crystal champagne flutes were now calloused and cracked from breaking down heavy cardboard boxes in the stockroom. Marcus faced a similar perfectly tailored obliteration. Following my merciless forensic audit, he was permanently barred from the financial sector. Stripped of his professional licenses and drowning under the crushing weight of the massive secondary mortgage he had illegally taken out on his mother's estate, he was forced into total bankruptcy. The arrogant, untouchable corporate director was now driving a leased sedan for a rideshare app, pulling 14-hour shifts just to afford basic groceries. His ultimate humiliation came daily navigating the very same buckhead streets he used to dominate, occasionally picking up mid-level executives who worked at his former firm. He had to sit in agonizing silence, gripping the steering wheel, his face burning with shame, as his passengers gossiped about the legendary Washington collapse in the back seat, completely unaware that their disgraced former boss was their driver. And then there was Estelle. The eviction from her historic estate had been swift and unforgiving. With her assets seized to cover Marcus's fraudulent debt, the grand matriarch of Atlanta society was reduced to renting a cramped, dingy one-bedroom apartment overlooking a noisy, congested highway overpass. Her sprawling antique furniture had been sold at auction to cover her outstanding property taxes. Now she sat at a cheap, wobbly laminate table in a kitchen barely large enough to turn around, listening to the incessant hum of a failing refrigerator. But the financial ruin was nothing compared to her social annihilation. The Atlanta elite had surgically excised her from their ranks. When she tried to attend Sunday service at her prestigious community church, the ushers politely but firmly redirected her away from her usual front-row pew. Her coveted country club membership was publicly revoked. Her phone never rang. The wealthy women who used to hang on her every word now crossed the street to avoid acknowledging her existence. Estelle was forced to live out her days in absolute deafening isolation, trapped in a tiny apartment with nothing but the bitter memories of the empire she had foolishly squandered. Miles away from their collective misery, high above the frantic noise of the city, my reality was entirely different. I stood in the center of my sleek, sunlit corporate office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the vibrant Atlanta skyline. The holding company I had built from the ground up was thriving, expanding its reach and generating unprecedented legitimate wealth. My name commanded absolute respect in every boardroom, spoken not with the patronizing tone the Washingtons had once used, but with genuine hard-earned reverence. But my greatest triumph was not the real estate acquisitions or the soaring profit margins. I shifted my weight gently, bouncing the beautiful, perfectly healthy baby girl resting on my hip. She cooed softly, her tiny hands grasping playfully at the lapel of my tailored blazer. She was safe, deeply loved, and completely insulated from the toxic poison of the family I had left behind. Looking out over the glittering city bathed in warm afternoon sunlight, I allowed myself a moment of quiet, profound reflection. The Washingtons had made a fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. They had looked at my quiet patience, my willingness to support them, and my devastating heartbreak when I was struggling alone in that hospital bed, and they had mistaken all of it for weakness. They truly believed I was nothing more than a convenient scapegoat, a disposable asset they could discard the moment I ceased to be useful to their grand delusional narrative. What they completely failed to realize was that I was the very foundation holding their fragile, fake lives together. I was the silent architecture keeping their glittering house of cards standing. The moment I withdrew my grace, the moment I stopped absorbing their collateral damage and decided to fight back, their entire world collapsed under the heavy weight of its own rotten lies. I pulled my daughter closer, pressing a long, tender kiss to her warm forehead. She let out a bright, joyful giggle that echoed beautifully against the glass walls of my office. I closed my eyes and breathed in the sweet scent of her hair. I was completely at peace. I was incredibly wealthy. I was deeply respected. But most importantly, looking down at my beautiful daughter, I knew I was finally totally free. True power and freedom do not stem from inherited wealth, social status, or manipulative control. Maya's triumph demonstrates that genuine strength comes from patience, self-respect, and the courage to stop absorbing the cruelty of toxic family members. When you stop acting as the foundation for their lies, their fragile house of cards inevitably collapses. Her journey proves that the ultimate revenge against those who view you as disposable is building an authentic, successful life without them. You define your own worth. Please share your story of setting firm boundaries and protecting your peace in the comment section below right now.